considerations, including political bias, directly affecting. I said, that's directly affecting, because you said they weren't the sole decision makers. I said, did they indirectly affect it? He said, yeah. Why? Because he said, you were the lead investigator of the Hillary Clinton. You were the liaison, if you will. You were the flow of information from the investigative team that you've said there's lots of them, and I kind of actually sketched a kind of a Venn diagram of how this works, organizational chart as it works, as you were describing it earlier today. You were the gatekeeper of information. Lisa Page was providing counsel to Andrew McCabe. On the Russian investigation, you were the head guy. You're the head guy. Now we have accumulation of biased information that indicates some kind of mental state of bias. And at the other end of this, we've got it that you're the head guy on these. That's what the Inspector General said under oath in testimony not too many weeks ago.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, if I may respond, I think
there's no question before you.
I want to correct some inaccurate things you said.
I didn't say anything inaccurate.
Oh,
there's
you
nothing
did.
correct.
The witness needs to be able to answer the question.
You're out of order.
The witness needs to be answering the question.
Mr. Chairman, when aspersions are cast on the witness, you ought to be able. Oh, there were.
Well, you should allow the witness to answer.
Yeah.
Why
are you afraid to let the witness answer the question?
Everyone will suspend, and the time of the gentleman has expired, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 5 minutes.
Sir, may I respond to the gentleman who just spoke?
No, you may not. The gentleman from Wisconsin has the time.
Mr. Chairman, you have said throughout this hearing that at the conclusion of the questioning, the witness would be permitted to respond. Is that rule now changed?
No question directed to him.
That's not true, Mr. Chairman.
It's true.
Well, he has a response he'd like to give to the committee. You said throughout the day that was the procedure. Now you're changing it. We're just going to allow people to make claims.
The gentleman is completely out of order.
No, Mr. Chairman, you're out of order.
No, the time belongs to the gentleman from Wisconsin, and he may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, you indicated, you must remember that you indicated that the gentleman could answer the question.
The chair has recognized.
I beg of you to allow the gentleman, at the end of this long hearing, to be able to explain conflicts in representation that have been made by various persons on the panel.
The gentleman from Wisconsin may proceed.
It seems to me that on advice of counsel, a lot of the things we want to find out here today, we're not going to find out. But I'd like to focus a little bit on the milieu in which you operate in the FBI. When I look at this area around Washington, D.C., I look, and we had a candidate run for president who ran on the promise to drain the swamp. When I look at the election results in the areas in which you and other people who work for the government around here live, I see a monolithic, almost monolithic mindset that can be illustrated in the election results in the area. Things that, given the country as a whole, was almost half for the candidate who wanted to drain the swamp and half for the candidate who didn't. You look District of Columbia, 4% for Donald Trump, Prince George County, 8%, Arlington, Virginia, 17%, Alexandria, 18%. I mean, things that in Wisconsin, 72 counties, and normally we're about a 50-50 state. There's not one county in which you have that, everybody voting together. So I want to dig into a little bit about the milieu in which you hang around with. Now, at the time where Mr. McCabe, who I believe was Miss Page's boss, at the time his wife ran for Congress, or was it maybe a state elected position, you referred to people who lived in a county just beyond Washington, D.C., a little bit more normal, still a Democratic county. You referred to them as this county, Loudoun County, is being gentrified, but it's still largely ignorant hillbillies. Now, I don't mean to embarrass you in that, because it doesn't surprise me that people in this swamp would refer to people, once you get a couple hours away from Washington, as ignorant hillbillies. It wouldn't surprise me if somebody was inadvertently got a hold of emails and people were saying that in the newsroom at MSNBC. It wouldn't surprise me if they were saying it in the Department of Interior or the Department of Education. It disappoints me a little bit that they were saying it in the FBI. But I'm going to ask you, in the areas of which people, you congregate in your business. How, you obviously talked about politics. How many people do you run into, say, in the Washington office here, who are overtly supporting President Trump?
When you say in the office, sir, a couple of things, and you may not have been here this morning. I do not view the people of Loudoun County as ignorant hillbillies. I live in an adjacent county, and much like in Wisconsin, you might look at folks in Minnesota with a sense of
I know
rivalry.
people like you.
I regret that statement. And
I know you regret it.
want
I know.
people
It's
in
one of those
Loudoun
things
County
that you
to know
never
I
thought
don't
would
discuss
come
that.
out. But
when you say the office, sir, I don't understand what you mean by around the office.
people who you work with on a daily basis.
I don't tend to know who they support, sir.
Well, it's apparent in the emails that you exchanged with Ms. Page, that not only with regard to her opinions, but you could obviously, the McCabe's were very political in nature. You must have some general opinions of the politics of the people you work around. You were not shy about sharing your political opinions.
Right. My sense is the FBI, including me, is a very conservative, typically, organization. They believe in law and order. They believe in a strong national defense.
I'm going to say, when it comes
traditionally, sir, that
to draining the swamp or otherwise,
I'm sorry, sir?
in areas in which I worked in the past, prior to getting involved in politics, I could almost always tell you or have an opinion where people come down to on these issues. You are not shy about talking about politics. I want to know, in the social circle that you hang around with, including at work, maybe you get at home, do you ever run into people who would have voted for President Trump, people who you know?
Yes.
Would you guess in the FBI, like I said, we rattled off the percentage of people voting for President Trump in the surrounding counties. Looks like overall maybe less than 1 in 6, just amazing. Could you comment again on your comment, largely ignorant hillbillies? And there are a lot of people who think like you in this swamp. Okay, it's not unusual, probably a lot of lobbyists probably feel that way, congressional staffers. Could you comment in general on the political viewpoint of the people who work in the Washington office with you?
The general perspective, as I just said, sir, the most FBI agents, in my experience, tend to be strongly conservative.
Not outside of Washington.
Strongly law in Washington, D.C. Strongly conservative, strongly law and order, strongly national defense. Up until the current date, very strongly Republican. I don't know. I couldn't tell you what people did or didn't vote for this election because we don't tend to talk about that.
Guess I'm out of time.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Gomez, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you've been on the hot seat for a number of hours. I just wanted to give you an opportunity. First, thank you for being here. Thank you for trying to answer the questions as to the best of your ability. But I want to give you at least 45 seconds to respond to any of the comments that have been made that you feel like you haven't been given the opportunity to respond to.
Sir, I appreciate that. And one thing, two things. One, with regard to the IG and what they found, to be clear, the IG report found no act of bias by me or anybody in the FBI, period. And he said in his testimony, my understanding is the same. Two, the IG found and stated in the report that I was amongst the most aggressive people in pursuing the Hillary Clinton investigation, going after Secretary Clinton. So those facts are undisputable. They're written down, and there's no two ways to try and spin out of those. And I don't want to take your time, and so I'll try and do this in 15 seconds. The insurance policy text that has come up before, that text represented a debate on information that we had received from an extraordinarily sensitive source and method, and that typically when something is that sensitive, if you take action on it, you put it at risk. And so there's a tension there. Maybe we should, just roll slow, take a typical 3-4 year counterintelligence investigation, because the more aggressive you are, the more you put it at risk. And some people said that. Some people said, hey, look, every poll is saying candidate Trump is likely not to win. Every Republican was saying that. Some people said, as a result of that, let's not risk this source. Let's go slow. What I advocated for, and what I'm saying is, look, we're the FBI. We need to do our job. We need to go investigate. While it isn't likely, according to all the pollsters and everybody, that candidate Trump's going to be elected, we need to make sure we are protecting America. We need to responsibly and aggressively investigate these accusations? Because you know what? If candidate Trump is elected, there might be people we need to be investigating that might be nominated for important national security positions. Everybody in America would want to know that. Candidate Trump would want to know that. So much like you probably won't die before you're 40.
No, thank you.
That's the meaning, sir.
No, thank you so much. I got sworn in July 11th, 2017. So I am one of the most freshman members of Congress. It was about a year ago yesterday. And I was excited to be on the Oversight Committee because I believe that Congress has a responsibility to be a check on the executive branch. But that's when it's being honest in its purpose, right? I don't believe our committees, led by the majority, has been honest in its purpose. Because if it has been, it would be treating requests by the minority with as much importance as their own. So I have a question. It's a rhetorical question. Why is it that the House Oversight Committee and the House Judiciary Committee have refused to issue a single subpoena to compel documents or witnesses from the Trump administration on any topic other than this one? It's because they don't believe and they don't care to discover the truth. They are using this process to throw more red meat to their base in order to turn it out for the midterms and to protect a president that has no moral authority to lead this country. So it is kind of embarrassing. I've been watching this farce and this circus for the last 5 hours, and I wonder to myself, what are people thinking? That there's grown men and women shouting over each other, insulting one another. Yeah, they try to dress it up with saying the gentleman from North Carolina, the gentle lady from California, but it's all a farce, and the American people know it. We've asked for subpoenas for a variety of issues. Commerce Department and the Census Bureau withholding documents on citizenship question. Department of Justice withholding documents on request to add a citizenship question. Department of Justice withholding documents on politicized hiring allegations for immigration judges. Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice withholding documents on gag orders against whistleblowers. White House withholding information on chartered flights. The list goes on. There's about 12 of them. But they have never issued a subpoena except on this. And the American people should ask why. Why? And the reason is because they're not interested in finding the truth or making sure that we hold this administration accountable. It's all for tossing red meat to their base. And you know what? We should never talk ill about anybody, in any particular part of our country. But this president has lowered that standard. He questions immigrants. He questions the allegiance of judges, the FBI, and that, in my opinion, is insulting. And I think that we need to grow up and show that the American people that we're here to act as a responsible branch of government. And I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, when I hear you talk about your passion for America, I believe you. I can see that passion. When you talk about your love for the FBI, I see it. I believe it. When you talked about your faith in the American electorate, I believe that. Now, what concerns me is you said that you didn't trust the election. To quote you, you didn't trust the election after Russia put their finger on the scale. Remember saying that earlier?
I don't believe that's exactly what I said, sir. I think I said something slightly different, but I recall that exchange.
Well, but that was the meaning, right?
I don't think that was the meaning, sir. The meaning was I was very concerned that Russia was attempting to do that. I prayed.
Russia had put their finger on the scale.
I don't recall what I said specifically.
You can find it later, but I wrote it down.
Okay, I will happy to tell you what I felt.
And what I want to ask you is, do you think that justifies then you, Mr. McCabe, and Lisa Page to correct that wrong that you perceived was done by the FBI?
That never happened, and that would not happen.
Let me ask you, the IG's report that I have right here, you said that political bias did not impact your professional actions. You said that earlier in this meeting as well. Now, let me give you a little background. In a text message sent on August 15th, and this has been discussed earlier, you wrote to Lisa Page, "I want to believe the path you threw out in Andy's office, that there is no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40.
Yes, sir.
Certainly remember that. You've heard it a lot. The reason that, was there anyone else in that meeting?
I'm sure there was. I don't remember who.
But, so you don't remember who all was it?
There were an inordinate number of meetings. We're the government. We have meetings. I don't remember for this particular meeting who was there.
Okay.
I could look at my notes.
But at least
maybe
two
tell
of
you.
those people that were in that meeting with you are no longer working for the FBI, are they?
I don't know that Mr. McCabe was there.
You don't know that Mr. McCabe was in the office?
He was in the office. My recollection of that meeting is that we had a briefing to the director. Sometimes after briefings like that, the director will stay behind with his very senior staff, like the general counsel and the deputy. And if we have other matters to discuss that don't merit the importance of the director's time, we'll go down to the deputy's office and wait for him to return. So he may have been there. He may not have been there. I don't recall.
But Mr. McCabe is no longer working at the FBI, is that correct?
That is correct.
How about Lisa Page?
She is not.
Anybody else that was in that meeting that you recall that no longer works at the FBI?
Possibly Mr. Baker, but I don't know if he was in the meeting or not.
Okay, let me ask.
Yeah, that's it. Possibly, I don't think Mr. Rubicki went down either.
Okay, let me ask, did you present the original FISA application?
No. So, sir, when I assume you were talking about the FISA application on Carter Page that
Correct.
I've been limited ability
Correct.
to answer questions.
Correct.
I did not.
Were you in the courtroom?
No.
Okay, and do you, and there were 3 renewals, correct?
Sir, I'm not certain I can discuss that without divulging classified information, and I don't know that I've been given clearance by the FBI to discuss that.
Okay. Well, Mr. Rosenstein was here and admitted that he signed the 3rd renewal.
I certainly defer to his statement, sir.
And he signed that 3rd renewal, but amazingly to me, Mr. Strzok, apparently because of the information that was in that renewal, he would not admit that he actually read the document. Do you know of any falsehood, any half-truth, any misinformation that was in that 3rd renewal that would preclude him from being able to say he read it and he signed it and approved it?
I have no information about the Deputy Attorney General and what he did or didn't do or why he did or did not do anything.
Okay, you said that political bias didn't affect your work, but the FBI and DOJ were both admonished for misconduct in the prosecution of Senator Ted Stevens, right?
Sir, I don't.
Time of the
I
gentleman.
was not involved in that investigation. I don't.
Okay,
know.
well, former Director Comey
The time
said
of the
that-
gentleman has expired. The witness can answer the question.
Okay. Do you know that they're undergoing training right now for political bias at the FBI? Is that correct?
I understand that was a recommendation in the IG report.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, despite your assertions that the IG report did not in any way indicate bias, I would disagree with that. But also, on page 424 of the Inspector General's report, he said that we therefore refer this information to the FBI for its handling and consideration of whether the messages sent by the 5 employees, of whom you're one, listed above, violates the FBI's offense code of conduct. Are you under review by the FBI Office of Professional Responsibility?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. In January 2014, the Inspector General for the Intelligence Community, Mr. Charles McCullough, sent out a letter and indicated that he had received two sworn declarations from one intelligence community element. These declarations cover several dozen emails containing classified information determined by the intelligence community element to be at the confidential, secret, and top secret special access program levels, which were you aware of this letter?
What was the date of the letter?
On January 14th, 2016?
I don't recall it now, but I may have known it at the time. Correspondence like that, sir, we had a team of anywhere from 20 to 60 people, so.
Well, this is, I understand that you can't know everything, and I get it. And I also want you to understand that I'm not going to be necessarily in an attack mode, because I want to get some answers.
Absolutely.
And this is a very, very serious problem that's raised by this letter, whether it's confidential, secret, top secret, but certainly special access program. You're former military, correct?
Yes, sir.
You can understand then the danger that this could pose for our men and women in harm's way.
Yes, sir.
Okay. This was January, and again, on March 4th, you send the text saying that Hillary should win $100 million to nothing. Then on May 4th is when you said, now the pressure really starts to finish the mid-year evaluation. At what point in there was the memo changed from gross negligence to extremely careless?
Sir,
it was in May.
I'm not going to be able to give you
I'm not asking for a date, but
calendar. I can't give you a breakdown of what occurred before what. I'm sorry.
And I understand you've been here a long time, and so have we, but it was in May.
Okay.
And what appears here, and it's in the context of the need to finish the mid-year investigation, is that Donald Trump had just won the primary. It was obvious that he was going to be the Republican nominee. And I believe you when you say you're a patriot. I believe that you care deeply about the country, and I can see how you and some of your colleagues have concluded that it's in the best interest to change it from gross negligence to extremely careless, because you just couldn't comprehend a President Trump or in your mind the danger that might pose to the country.
That's not what happened, sir.
Well, something happened to change this from gross negligence to extremely careless, because extremely careless is not prosecutable.
I can tell you why it happened if you'd like me to answer, but I don't want to take your time if you don't.
Well, I know what the Inspector General said he thought happened. He said it was changed because it wasn't prosecutable, because it's not in the code. The Espionage Act doesn't have anything in the criteria for extremely careless. So I think, again, trying to give you some credit for your patriotism and your desire to do what's best for the country. I mean, our history is replete with people who've made decisions that they thought were the right decisions at the time. They got outside the lines. And the text messages and the fact that clearly there is a bias. And I get it. We all have biases. It's what we do with them. It's how we act on them, how we are able to compartmentalize these things that determine the course of things, really the course of history. In the last few seconds here, I want to tell you that I appreciate the fact that you sought forgiveness from your family. I appreciate the fact that you realize that you have severely damaged the reputation of the FBI. And we're not here about the FBI. We're about here about you and what you did. I literally sat here, and I mean this sincerely, and prayed for you and your family, because that I can't imagine what your family's feeling going through this. And I'm not going to question your integrity, but I will say this to you, and I hope this is constructive. I hope you take it as constructive. As I've watched your body language, as I've watched your facial expressions, it's almost as though you've enjoyed this. This is a competition for you, in many respects, even now.
So I can tell you,
and I don't think I'm not going to say your problem's a lack of integrity. I think it's a problem with hubris, and I think you need to take that into account in regard to how you handle this going forward, because it makes it more difficult for us to give you the benefit of the doubt.
The time of the gentleman has expired.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
The
Mr. Chairman.
gentleman may briefly respond.
Oh, no, sir. I appreciate your prayers. Sir, I can tell you when you look at what happened in the investigation, everything was done by the book. And you can assure yourself and your constituents and everybody you're talking to, when you look at both investigations, notwithstanding what decisions were made at a high level to say something, not say something, when you look at the investigation, what those men and women did, everything was done right and by the book. And I share your concern about the nature of the classified information. We found a bunch. TS, Special Access Program, confidential and secret. All that was found, all that was detailed in Director Comey's statement, so I appreciate it. But
in regard to that, I want you to understand, everybody here who
The
knows.
gentleman's time has
I'm serious.
expired.
Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman,
The chair-
parliamentary inquiry.
There-
Relating to the rules of this hearing, parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman will state her parliamentary inquiry.
The witness had attempted to answer the gentleman's question.
And he was allowed to.
Mr. Chairman, just a moment, please. On a question that's been asked over and over again about the gross mismanagement, gross negligence issue. And the witness was not allowed at that time to give the clarification. I think the record deserves the gentleman's clarification about the gross
The gentlewoman has not stated a parliamentary
negligence,
inquiry.
which was not written by the gentleman, as I
The
understand.
gentlewoman from Georgia, Ms. Handel, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Agent Strzok, for being here. I have found your testimony today, frankly, to be quite remarkable in its disingenuousness. And you have shown a disturbing degree of denialism about your actions and the impact of those actions. I think we would all agree that everyone does have personal viewpoints. That is very true. But Agent Strzok, there is a very big difference between someone expressing his or her political views generally and someone leading an FBI investigation, making highly negative and explosive comments about the actual target of that investigation. Would you agree? That's a yes or no.
rephrase the question. I don't understand the.
You have
the
a
yes or
really
no of that.
awesome talent for filibustering. You might
Ma'am,
want to think about running for the Senate. I'll just say again, you were the lead investigator, one of the lead investigators, and you made highly negative and explosive comments about the actual target of an investigation. That is distinctly different from an individual expressing his or her political views. You were in a position that you needed to be at a higher, much higher level of standard, and you failed to reach that. Your assertion that your statements do not constitute bias is, well, absurd. The facts are this. The FBI Inspector General testified before this very body that you did indeed exhibit bias. And further, in his report, he detailed numerous examples of investigated steps that were not, quote, by the books, as you just testified. What I also find stunning is that someone in your role with the responsibilities that you've had engaged in such grossly unprofessional, unacceptable, and unethical behavior. And now, truly ironic, did I hear you say earlier that you're in a senior position in the HR division for the FBI?
Yes, ma'am. Currently,
That's very ironic. So let me ask you this. You were in a supervisory role at the FBI. Suppose you found out that one of your direct reports was sending the kind of text messages that you were sending about the target of an investigation that they were working on. What action would you take?
ma'am, if they were sending personal opinion about a political matter, that's their business. I think given my experience to date, I would caution them against doing that on a government device. That is entirely separate and distinct from an individual that was not a political candidate, that did not have a kind of First Amendment protection attached to it.
All right, suppose that you found out that one of your direct reports was having an extramarital affair with a colleague or with someone outside of the Bureau. What action would you take?
Ma'am, it depends. If it was against the FBI's regulation in terms of if it was somebody in their chain of command above or below them, which is inappropriate or not allowed by our regulations, I would tell them and report that. If it was otherwise permitted in our regulations, I would probably talk to them and say, hey, look, I'm aware of this, and you need to be aware that, and just take into consideration what you're doing in the appearance of it.
So obviously you understand the gravity of the transgressions, in engaging in the kind of behavior that you've been engaging in, especially with the extramarital affair. It opens up an agent to exploitation and even blackmail, given the fact that you have and currently hold a high-level security clearance. Did you ever discuss your relationship with Ms. Page with HR? or anyone around your security clearance?
They were well aware of it they.
When did they become aware of it?
Well, when it was kind of made very public by the media after it was leaked
so it was
late
in
last
the
year.
press.
But ma'am, I can
You
tell you,
didn't
if I can, your
proactively tell
premise,
them.
though, that it makes it susceptible to blackmail, I never could have been blackmailed or coerced by the nature of that relationship. That is not the nature of my patriotism
When you're
and the nature
undergoing
of
a
what I believe
security
in this
clearance,
country.
you are asked a
could not
question about
ever,
that. There's
nobody
a
could
reason
have
that
made
security clearances ask those kinds of questions. Did you ever advise Mr. Mueller of your relationship with Ms. Page?
I did not.
Why?
It didn't strike me as relevant.
You have a lot to learn about human resources. I mean, wow. It is absolutely relevant. There should have been conversations. I find it interesting that there was no discussion that the two of you shouldn't both be together on that same investigation. Mr. Strzok, no reasonable person could not be concerned about your actions in this investigation. No reasonable person could not be concerned about this situation involving yourself. So thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. DeSaulnier, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for your testimony and your service. It's been a long day, and I admire your resume. I came from a similar background. I went to a Catholic high school and a Catholic college. I remember going to Holy Cross and having people say, the graduates from Harvard and Yale make the laws, but the graduates from Holy Cross and Fordham enforce the laws. And we always took great pride in that because I think you as well, and I, having had friends who served in the Bureau, took great pride in that that education reinforced your ethical beliefs in a difficult world where we all make mistakes, and that's part of our humanity. So I admire your work. I must say I'm discouraged today to have listened to much of this hearing. On many levels, I'm discouraged because I consider many of the people on the other side of the aisle as friends, good friends. I must say this reminds me of what it must have been like to sit through the McCarthy hearings. I'm waiting for that moment at long last. Do you have no shame? But maybe that's to come. Having said that, I am troubled by the fact that someone in your background did what you did. But I believe in redemption, so I think you have acted in that way today. I wanted to ask you a couple of just a comment and a question specifically for one case. So there's been a persistent conspiracy theory about Hillary Clinton email investigation and one of your former colleagues, John Jackalone, the executive assistant director for the FBI's National Security Branch. He left the FBI because he was upset that there was a bias in the Clinton case, so the conspiracy theorists say, and going, quote, sideways, or, quote, nowhere by design. So he responded in testimony in front of our committee on June 21st and said that these allegations were completely false, quote, unquote, nonsense. Quote, he said, totally inaccurate. This is all nonsense. Almost the whole thing is nonsense. I'd have to read it again to definitively say that, but from what I recall, I didn't leave because I was disgruntled. I left because I was broke. He continues, I loved every minute I spent in the FBI. I had one bad day in 25 years, and that was on 9/11. And I think it was a bad day for a lot of people and for this country. So there's no way I left because I was sideways or because I was disgruntled. I was purely the right time for me, 25 years in, right opportunity. I never spoke to anybody that wrote the internet article. I don't know who they used it, the source to this thing. He further said, explaining the Clinton case from the outset, he said, quote, I fully recognized right at the gate that it was a political bombshell, that we, meaning the FBI, were an apolitical organization, right? So I had the referral, we were going to open up the case, and we were going to wait to put together a team, and we were going to conduct a thorough down-the-middle investigation, which is what we did, end quotes. And then starting again in quotes, he said about Director Comey, he's a straight-ahead guy, right, I mean, and you know, if the evidence existed, he would have pushed it for prosecution. And then about you, he said, quote, there was no indication that he exhibited any bias while he was conducting the investigation while he was working for me. He went 110 miles an hour, and we were always looking for new ways to uncover information and evidence. So I had no indication that he even would politically lean the way I guess some of these text messages show that he leaned. At no point in time during my management of this case did he exhibit anything that would provide any slight indication of some of those things that were, posted and put out to the media. End quotes. You have any comments on your former colleague's comments?
Sir,
or what he's had to go through?
I deeply appreciate them. Mr. Jackalone is an extraordinary agent with a heart of gold, and I appreciate them.
So just in closing, I'm just curious, and not to be redundant, but I really want to sort of reiterate, you were nonpartisan in your comments and criticisms, which I think is fair. My dad used to be a state superior court judge in Massachusetts, and I remember one of my siblings, once active in politics, put a bumper sticker in his car, and he went ballistic. There was no question that he was a very committed Republican, but he was concerned about the perception. So sitting here today after all these hours, is there any one thing that you could encapsulate what the Bureau could learn from this experience to make sure no one would sit where you're sitting again?
Sir, there is. My belief is that these texts would never be public. And whether reasonable or not, they were made public. And I deeply regret certainly the appearance that they created and all the way that manifested itself out personally with regard to the Bureau. So at the end of the day, we're judged on our actions. Certainly, what I do with regard to my personal matters is my own business. But I would also say I take some comfort that when I look at my actions in the workplace, that they are proper, that they are correct, that they were done for the right reasons and done in the right way. And so whenever I get ups and downs in this experience, I look at that record of work, and it gives me considerable comfort that it was done right and well. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you back?
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Rothfuss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, you were the lead investigator in the Clinton email investigation. Were there ever any searches for emails with the ClintonEmail.com route on the government data warehouse that would have held data collected through 702 or other FISA authorities?
Sir, I would have to think about that.
Think hard.
Rephrase the question. Were there any searches of
Did you?
email?
The IG report talks about servers that were searched and devices that were searched. Were there ever searches done on the data warehouse system that would contain data collected pursuant to FISA or 702?
So when you say data warehouse system, you're referring to any FBI data system that would house FISA or 702
Correct.
data? Yes, sir, I believe there were.
There were. Did you know if anything was found on those?
Not offhand, I don't.
It's not referenced in the IG report whether that was searched. On page 96 of the IG's report, it said that investigators learned late in their review that the FBI considered seeking access to certain highly classified materials that may have included information relevant to the mid-year investigation, but ultimately did not do so. Furthermore, unnamed FBI Attorney 1 went so far as to say that review of those materials was necessary to complete mid-year, and even started to draft a memo about it. And per the IG, you thought reviewing those emails would have been a logical investigative step. Who stopped it?
I don't know. It was levels above me. My understanding was it was outside the Bureau that was stopped.
Did you object to that?
I disagreed. I wanted to search it. We're getting very close to classified information, so I want to be very careful.
Did you send an email or a memo to that effect that you said we need to search this?
Sir, I don't recall the nature of what that discussion was. I remember talking about doing it and wanting to do it.
As a counterintel officer, did you know if any other non-DOJ government officials have reviewed the classified materials in question in this case?
I don't know.
Did any non-DOJ personnel communicate with anyone at the FBI or DOJ or to mid-year personnel about this classified material?
Sir, I can't answer that question without providing or without saying.
Do you know if anybody on the mid-year team, FBI or DOJ, ever briefed anyone at the White House about such classified material as a potential related to mid-year?
I don't know. I'm not aware of it, but I don't know.
Who had the most influence on mid-year investigators' belief that this classified material was ultimately not necessary and would not have a material impact?
Sir, those are two different questions. There's an investigative question, which is the leader of the team, which included the senior investigators, had a desire to do something, and then there was a decision at a much higher level and at a different organizational spot that was well above and over.
Now, this was all happening in May of 2016. Was there a rush to wrap this up?
This was not all happening in May of 16.
Well, it's according to the IG report, this was all coming out in May of 16.
Sir, there may have been aspects of that discussion in May of 16, but my recollection is that this was broader than that. And
on page 96 of the IG report, it said investigators learned late in their review that the FBI considered seeking access to certain highly classified materials.
I think that says that's when the IG learned about it, sir, if I'm not mistaken on that reading. Sir, I don't remember specifically when this came up in the context of midyear. I could not tell you when I first became aware.
And you were the lead
classified
investigator
matter
at
issue.
midyear, right?
I was.
Yeah, okay. During midyear exam,
Sir, I was not.
During midyear exam, did investigators find any emails between Secretary Clinton and President Obama, including any emails that would have used aliases?
Including any emails?
Emails that would have used aliases.
Yes.
Did any of those emails contain classified information?
With President Obama?
Between Mrs. Clinton and President Obama?
I don't believe so, but I would have to verify that with the case file, sir.
Do you know if any of those emails were ever intercepted by a foreign actor?
I don't know.
On page
when you say any emails, sir, are you talking about emails between Secretary Clinton and President Obama?
Yes.
Or the emails contain classified?
No, between Secretary Clinton and President Obama.
I don't know.
On page 149 of the IG report, it noted that he found evidence that you advocated for more aggressive tactics in the Clinton investigation, like grand jury subpoenas and search warrants. Ultimately, the mid-year team decided to go with the kid glove approach using consent agreements. I can think of some recent high-profile examples where federal agents did not use the kid treatment. Relating to mid-year, who specifically had the authority to decide not to use compulsory process to obtain evidence in this investigation?
Sir, I'm certain the IG did not use the phrase kid glove. The decision ultimately about whether or not to issue process rests with the prosecutors.
Did anyone outside of the mid-year team suggest to the team not to use an aggressive approach?
There was a constant debate, which is normal and healthy, between the agents and the attorneys about how aggressive to be. My recollection is that
anybody outside the mid-year team? You're talking about people on the mid-year team.
Not that I know.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
No, not to my recollection. There was nobody outside the mid-year team that was exerting any pressure one way or the other.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Comer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strzok, Hillary Clinton has said publicly that FBI Director James Comey cost her the election. Do you share Hillary Clinton's opinion?
Sir, I don't know. I've read a lot of pollsters and a lot of speculation, but I don't know.
It's an important question because you think about Hillary Clinton making a statement like that about the FBI and the FBI director, as well as the statements that President Trump has made recently about the FBI, and those are the two leaders of each party in the last presidential election. So I think it does matter. Out of curiosity, are there any recordings of the interviews of the Clinton email investigation?
No, sir. I don't believe we recorded any interviews.
So none of the interviews were recorded?
To the best of my recollection, sir, I'm not. I would need to review the case file, but I don't believe any were.
Is that normal for
Yes.
an investigation of that size?
Yes.
Mr. Strzok, did you consult with James Comey before he made the decision to go public days before the presidential election with the fact that the FBI was going to reopen the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails once it was determined that Anthony Weiner had access to the emails and potentially had access to classified information? Did you consult with James Comey before he made that decision?
I was present at meetings where that decision was discussed.
Do you think that was the right decision?
Sir, that's also a difficult question. I think for all of us, it was kind of a 51-49 proposition. I came out of that decision comfortable with doing so.
Did Ms. Page consult with James Comey before he made the decision to go public?
You'd have to ask her, sir. I don't know that she did, but
we hope to get to ask her some questions. Do you think that James Comey leaked out let me back up. In a text message from you to Ms. Page, you mentioned insurance policy. That's been referenced many times today. What exactly did you mean by having an insurance policy in case, I would assume, President Trump won the election or was looking like he was going to win the election?
Sir, I appreciate that question because it is taken very much, I understand it's ambiguous and that people have taken it out of context. The insurance policy was merely an analogy to you do something when something isn't likely to happen. You're probably not going to die before you're 40, but you have an insurance policy anyway. What we had before us was an allegation that something significant, that members of the Trump campaign may have been working in cooperation with the Russians. And some people were saying, hey, look, this sensitive source of information that's so sensitive, so vulnerable, we shouldn't put it in danger because sometimes if you go out and do aggressive investigation, if it's a drug snitch or intelligence source, you can cause significant harm. And a lot of people looked and said, hey, well, look, all the pollsters, everybody in the world is saying it's not likely that President Trump's going to be elected, so don't worry about it. We can just let this lie. I had a different view, and I said, you know what? It doesn't matter whether or not he's going to be elected. We need to do our job. We're the FBI. We need to aggressively go out there, pursue the allegations, because
let me ask you this.
But I want to finish up because
you've answered the question. Do you think that James Comey leaked out about the reopening of the Hillary email investigation because he needed a, quote, insurance policy to cover his back for predetermining that Hillary Clinton was innocent in the email investigation before it ever even began?
I don't think Director Comey leaked anything with regard to that I'm aware of with regard to the Clinton investigation. I certainly do not think he, I, or anybody else viewed any investigation or any step in the sense of what you're saying that we needed to do something to prevent any particular action at all.
With respect to the clear bias of Donald Trump in your text messages and your clear prejudice against the Trump voters, and by the way, I'm one of those smelly hillbillies from Appalachia that you referenced in your text, you were in a supervisory role at the FBI. What would you do if you found a text from a subordinate of yours that exhibited the same type of bias that you had towards a group of people that were key witnesses or key whatever to the investigation? How would you handle that scenario?
Sir, if I found a text for a subordinate that was expressing a political opinion, one, I don't think I'd see it, and two, I think it's entirely appropriate. If your question is the text was about a target of an investigation, talking about the target, that's an entirely different matter, and I'd bring that subordinate in and counsel him. But those are apples and oranges. They are not at all the same.
Well, I will conclude by this statement, Mr. Chairman. I believe that this is a bad day for the FBI. I believe that we have an overwhelming majority of quality FBI agents and intelligence agents all across the United States and all across the world. But it's unfortunate that when reading the Inspector General's report and sitting here listening to your testimony, watching the reactions from some of your colleagues behind you with rolling their eyes and frowning faces, and it's just very discouraging as a member of Congress that we've tried this hard to get information. The American people want to know. This Russia investigation has been going on for a long time. Many believe that it is a witch hunt. It needs to wrap up. But from what we've heard today, there are a lot of problems with your credibility as the lead agent in the entire Russia investigation. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.